What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Contractor Commute. Today, we're going to talk through how to manage construction projects like a boss. We're going to continue on that series and really hit on checklists and calendars and communication today. But so we're excited to have you guys.
Kinsey, close your eyes for a minute. Imagine a
Okay.
world in which you are a hero with your customers.
Yeah.
You're winning. You're winning not just jobs, but you are on time. You're on schedule.
Yeah.
You're beating the schedule, not just meeting it. And really, you're making money. You're achieving your goals.
Yeah.
You're achieving what you set out to do by starting your own business. And a lot of our audience, you guys are small business owners.
Mm-hmm.
You have this dream, time, money, freedom.
Yeah.
This is why you guys started off. And I think this is not just a hypothetical situation where you have that freedom. This can be a reality,
Right.
and it can be easier than you think. But I think this project management series. We're here because we want to unpack some of this stuff. What does
Yeah.
it take to actually effectively manage projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of recapping to our last episode, we talked a little bit about why processes are important to efficiently manage projects. And, we talked about good things just don't happen by themselves.
Yes.
It was one of the things we talked about. We talked about how you need good people, but it's not all you need. There's more to it than just good people. And then you need to define a process in order to improve upon it. And so
Yes.
I think those were kind of the core things. If you missed that last episode, go back and, obviously follow our show so that you get notified on some of these things, but go back to it and kind of recap some of that even before you jump into this one too, to find a little bit of value of the why.
Yeah, and clarifying one point from the last podcast was, it's not you need good people,
Right.
but that's not enough.
Sure.
The integrity, the character, the honesty, the work ethic, like those are important things to have in your team.
Yeah.
But without a process, you are such a demotivator to your team. Like
Right.
They can be
It's
just
true.
wandering around aimlessly.
Mhm.
And really, you lose that sort of image to your team as well, where you're like, we're not winning as a company, we're not winning as a team, and nobody wants to be a part of that. So I
Yeah,
think
well, it's demotivating
Yes.
for an employee.
Demoralizing.
Yeah, to actually just live in a place of chaos
Yeah.
because you're almost handicapped from where do I even focus my time or my effort when it's just complete chaos. Nothing actually is able to be followed through on, things like that. So
Yeah, and you can't effectively teach anything.
Right.
Well, I mean, you can teach it eventually, but you
Yeah.
can't effectively teach if you don't have a process
Yeah.
defined. You can't
Right.
say this
Or
is how we
efficiently.
do it. But if we don't have
Mhm.
this is point 1, point 2, and we can improve upon it, we're just mindlessly strolling along.
yeah, that's good.
I think my dad would use an illustration. He said, if you aim at nothing, you get a bullseye every time.
Yeah, it's true. There's
So-
truth to that. Yeah. Okay. So practically,
Mhm.
so obviously our last episode, we talked about the why, we talked about the theory, to buy in on some of that. So practically, maybe dive in a little bit on how do you practically manage?
So we have the
projects?
memorable, the 3 C's at ConGenius.
Okay.
Well, if you add ConGenius, you have 4.
Well, that wasn't
Yeah,
intentional.
but there's the checklist you need. You need
Yeah.
a calendar, and you need communication.
That's good. So break down checklists a little bit for us. What's the importance of a checklist, or how do you start?
Yeah, well, let's start off with a checklist. Sometimes feels like we are amateurs, and so we need a checklist.
Yeah.
And we don't know what we're doing, so we need to have a checklist we follow. And this is the opposite. This is the illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Amateurs start off without checklists. Professionals have checklists.
Right.
If you look at, we talked about in the last episode
Or
in
aviation,
aviation, they have checklists for everything. We're going to land the plane. We have a checklist. We're going to take off. We have a checklist. These are guys that are seasoned veterans. Some of them have thousands of hours of experience. It doesn't
Right.
say, oh, well, we do away with the checklist. No, we stick to it even more. So this is the thing that separates the men from the boys.
Mhm.
You have a checklist. You have a predefined process you follow. You improve upon it. So if we're going to have a checklist, though, we got to start somewhere.
Right.
We don't just start our business and have a checklist.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these are very targeted to the way we do things. We need to build one.
Right.
So number
We'd
one, we
start
need to build a
by
checklist.
building a
Yes.
checklist.
Yes,
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we talked about even in prepping
Yep.
for the podcast was the level of detail that you actually need
Yes.
to be able to define a checklist and for people to fulfill, to the requirement that's necessary to complete a job, well, is probably surprising. But I
Yes.
think in terms of what we kind of talked about in prep is start somewhere and then improve from it, from that level. So what kind of checklists do you need? So we're going practical, right? So construction, we're talking project management, we're talking construction business. So give us some examples, talk through what checklist do you need for a construction company who maybe doesn't have checklists or needs to improve some, or, what areas of business could we apply them?
We could break it down into 3 basic categories. There's the pre-sale or prior to winning the project.
Okay.
Then you have the completion phase, the building, the services
Right.
being rendered, and then you have the quality control is more or less saying, did we meet the standards in which we set out in the scope of the project to do?
Okay.
So, those are the 3 basic checklists. You can have other checklists depending on your business, but those are the 3 basic categories.
Yeah.
So in my business, we did remodeling.
Okay.
And we had a pre-sale checklist, and some of that started off with a site visit. And just this was, as an example.
Yeah, we pulled up some examples.
Yeah.
We could kind of like walk through them actually.
Yeah, this is a checklist we built out in our initial site visit. And number 1 was, do we need a permit? Do we need a plan? Do we need a survey? We would take pre-construction photos. We'd sketch the work area. We'd gather dimensions. We'd get wall square footage. We'd get floor square footage, and so on and so forth. So this was just a checklist of saying, I'm going out to site visit, and I want to make sure I captured all these things.
That's good.
How many times have you guys gone out to a project, came back, and say, oh, shoot, I forgot
one thing.
Yeah.
You got to go back out, right?
Exactly.
You're losing
so
money.
You guys are doing the same kinds of things every day, usually.
Right.
And when you're not, you start doing a new thing, you start building a new checklist for it.
Yeah, that's
you say,
good.
and this is the thing that becomes awesome about checklists, guys, is now you have a repeatable, a replicable thing that now you can pass on to the next guy. You can train a new thing. This is what we do when we go on a site visit, guys.
Yep. No questions.
Exactly. We're ready to go. And all these things are captured. We've got our photos. We've got our, yes, we don't, yes, we need a plan.
Yeah.
And so now we come back to the office and we say, okay, since we need a plan, here's our next check.
Yeah.
Our next check.
So
checklist.
good. So go into the build checklist,
Okay.
right? I mean, I know we pulled up a couple other examples. We pulled up a build checklist and then a quality control checklist just to as kind of resource in kind of talking through it.
Yep.
And one of the things guys we'll do is we'll actually link these in our show notes below so that way you guys, there'll be just links to our website to where you can download those PDFs or, Google Docs as well if you guys want to modify them from there too.
So this was more or less our build checklist. So this was on a remodel project where we had, after you had all the pre-sale stuff done, we had to make sure that we had all of our materials ordered. So we had a complete checklist of we're ordering our interior and exterior doors, windows, flooring. We'd made sure we have all of the products for our cabinets. We ordered these certain millwork pieces, and we just had a checklist for everything we needed for a different project. And then if something didn't apply to a project, we could just cross it out and say that's not applicable.
Yeah. How many pages is that checklist?
This
for a kitchen
checklist
remodel?
is about 10 pages long. Yeah.
So simple,
Yeah.
guys. That's so easy to remember all of those checklists. That's the point, right?
Well, if you didn't have 10 pages of checklists, you'd have to remember that in your head.
Exactly.
So rather than 10 pages, then you would have, and it came down to, these are all the things that need to be done.
That's good.
And then you referenced the quality assurance checklist.
Right.
And as an example on that one, without getting too into the weeds here, but
no, let's go to weeds.
Go weeds.
Let's go,
okay, yeah. So this was on the framing side. We wanted to make sure that our walls are plumb and straight, our studs are set plumb with consistent spacing, our rough openings are correct. We didn't want any smaller than quarter inch, smaller than the specification. We didn't want them anything bigger than that. We wanted to make sure there was mechanical anchors were required. We had our hurricane clips, our joist hangers, rafters, all those were properly nailed. We were using fasteners correctly. We had blocking in place for drywall. A lot of times that got missed. Make sure we had furring where it was required. You had, when you had beam work where the anchors attached where they needed to be, where they lagged through. Did the stairs meet the code? Make sure that those were all the way they built to spec. So that was just on framing.
Yeah.
And really you had a guy walking around with a level, with a tape measure, with a set of plans, and check, went through the whole list and said, yep, that looks good.
Yeah. And in your business, did you use just like print that off and then give that paper to different roles?
Exactly. Whoever's on that job. And just to speak to our guys, I mean, sometimes you are that PM.
Right.
Sometimes you are delegating it to somebody else. And this scales with your business.
Right.
In mine, we went from 2 people to 14 people, and it wasn't what fit. 2 people didn't work at 14 people, and vice versa.
Well, hence why you're modifying them as you go.
Yes.
And it's not, what you create day one is not going to be what you have in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 or 5.
So true.
Your scope's going to change depending on project. Obviously, there's so much that goes into that. So.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of highlight to it. Now, if you didn't have that checklist, because a lot of this seems very intuitive. Like if you're a framing carpenter, you're going to say, that and also. Yeah. You're going to know these things intuitively, and you say, I don't need somebody to tell me those things.
Right.
Here's what happens with experienced pros. You have other jobs going on. You have days of the week where you say, I need to leave before a certain thing's done. Mm-hmm. Somebody forgets one specific piece. Then you're going to a job and your drywall guy's out there, and he's like, well, they didn't put blocking back here for the shower door, but he doesn't know that. He drywalls over it. Next thing you know, you're having to drywall a wall because you didn't put blocking in for a heavy glass door.
Yeah.
You didn't put blocking in for specific fixtures. You know, like the things that really matter didn't get done.
Totally.
Can you correct them later? 100%. Did that cost you money?
Yeah.
Wow.
Who's paying for it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
Your
not really a
customer's not
change
paying for
order.
that. No,
At that
yeah,
point,
right.
you just
Yeah.
did it wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
that's
Hey,
not their fault.
customer, we spent more time than we thought.
Yeah. Profit margin
Yep.
just goes down.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah,
And
that's
enough
good.
of those things stack up. And I just give you kind of taking you back in my experience of running a business of this became a necessity.
Right.
This wasn't just some random idea, just me sitting in my office saying, you know what, I need I need to create some cumbersome process for our team. No, it was necessitated by the fact that these things can't get missed and we need to do them. I mean, and so your inspections and all of these things are so important.
Yeah.
You forget an inspection and you start drywalling and you're like, oh no, next thing you know, you've got a problem.
Yeah. I think it's so good too. One thing to note here is like, if you don't want to be the one who's actually managing everything in the entire project forever, you know, like, because if your business is just you and you don't want it to be that way, you want to grow, you want to hire other people, you want to, even if it's one other person, you know, like we said earlier, you have to have some of this in place so that there's some redundancy and that you're not on the hook for everything all the time. You know what I mean? Like, to get the time freedom that most people seek in the space and when they start their own business in the first place, you got to have some redundancy here to be able to say, okay, I can now allocate this portion of work to someone else. Yeah. Obviously build it for yourself up front so that you can master it and then allocate it, you know, to make the most of your time.
Really good.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about building it. Obviously step one, build it. Yep. You know, start as vague as you want, and then, you know, customize from there and make it better, improve it.
Some checklist is better than no checklist.
Totally.
And so don't get hung up on the starting point, guys. Yeah. I mean, build a basic one-page checklist and say, you know what, we forgot a bunch of things. Add it to the next one.
Yeah, that's good.
Involve your team in this process as well. If you have a team, if you have people working for you, involve them in this process. I would recommend that you don't involve your team prematurely in this either. Yeah. You want to flush out, what is the purpose? What do I want to accomplish from this checklist? What is the desired result before you involve your team? Yeah. And then you're pitching that to them saying, guys, this is what I want to achieve. Yeah. This is what we're trying to, this is the problem we're addressing. So they say, oh yeah, I saw that too last week. We forgot that. Yeah. That was a problem. And then you get ownership when you involve them in it as well, because now they're saying they helped create a checklist that they're going to now follow. Yeah, totally. As opposed to you dictating of saying, listen, guys, we're doing this now. And they're like, okay, another mandate, another thing we have to do. So good. And I think it shows humility as a leader to be like, what did I miss here too? Like, you're not saying like it's perfect from, you know, day one. So modify it and help improve it as a team. So good. Yeah. So this is the implementation side, you know, but you're building it as part of a team, you know, once that first draft, if you will, is built. Yeah. So then implementing it, what else goes into actually implementing that? How do you affect change in a company and get buy-in, I guess? Yeah. You also need to make sure that people know that this is not an experiment, that you are committing to this, because when you do shift anything, people are change resistant. I'm change resistant. You're change resistant.
Super change resistant, actually.
You're more change resistant than I am. Yeah. But we don't like change because we have routine ways of doing things.
Yeah, because I got a checklist.
Yes.
Just kidding.
So in order to make sure that your team understands that you're committing to this, you're saying, we're not going to be perfect. You want to set expectations, to your point, Kinsey, of just saying, you want to show that humility of saying, we're going to learn things along the way. Yeah. But we want to commit to doing this. We need to do this, and it's not optional. Yeah. But also make it fun. Yeah. Involve them in it. And then you also need to start saying, okay, well, who does the checklist involve? Like, who does this affect? Right. And so you have specific people, like if you have any size of a team, you know that, well, not everybody needs to be in a back office checklist. Right, right. Some checklists are just for you and for your project manager. Other ones involve people actually fulfilling the work. Yeah. You might not need your field crew in on your pre-construction checklist. Right, I guess. Yes, you know, that process. Yes, yeah. And each checklist should have a checklist owner, somebody responsible for making sure everything's done. And it's not just a fall person, it's not somebody to blame, but you know, they're going to make sure it gets done. Sure. And then it's like, oh, I thought you were going to do it. There's an old expression, when two people feed a horse, it dies. Because I thought you fed the horse. Oh yeah, nobody feeds it. Right. Yeah. Right. So it's making sure we have a clear owner. And then you really do the enforcing of this by not saying, guys, why didn't you get it done? You're going to say, well, I'm going to schedule time to review this checklist with you. And that's how you enforce it. Yeah. And I think the enforcing side also leans into the improve side too. Because it's like, if you have set aside time, then you can be like, well, why didn't we meet some of these checklist items? Do we need to tweak them? Are they not understandable? You know what I mean? So I think that really leads into, like, from an implementation side, you know, we talked about building it, obviously, and then involving your team in it, assigning a checklist owner, and then improving upon that, making sure that it's written, it's clear, it's straightforward, you know, and then back to your
setting up time for that. It's like a retro, meeting of,
Yes.
hey, what went well, what didn't go well, how can we tweak it and improve it as a team?
I like that clarity aspect, Kinsey, because if a checklist is too clunky, right? If it's too long and seems unnecessary, then people aren't going to follow it as much.
Right.
So make sure it's very specific, and all of the things you put on there, it's like, yes, this needs to be done, not just like, well, sometimes in some situations. And if it is one of those types of things, then maybe that needs more clarity, right?
Yeah,
it just needs to be really understandable. So I like that too. It needs to be such where it's so clear, so concise, to the point, so applicable that it's also very repeatable.
Yeah. The ultimate goal is that the checklist can be used for every project moving forward. You're not having to create unique checklists for every job. You're not having to start over from scratch every single time, like templating out a lot of the stuff, which is what you just reviewed a little bit ago. It's like, hey, you were operating off of those checklists. Obviously, you're being modified and improved on, but you were operating off of those checklists over and over again, depending on the job.
Yes. And I saw this change happen in my business when we shifted from seat of the pants flying to actual checklists.
Yeah.
It changed something in me, and I had more confidence. And it also changed something with my team. They had more confidence, not just in me, but in our company too. We're going the right direction as a company. We're keeping our promises. We're getting things done correctly. And that's the kind of thing you need. It's a subtle change, but it's a morale boost. Everyone's like, wow, we're doing things right. We're doing things precisely. Yeah. We're following a list. And then also, stuff didn't get dropped. I mean, some of those things are so painful.
It's so good. Yeah.
So painful. Yeah.
So good. So going back to our 3 C's, right?
Yes.
Checklist. We just covered checklist a little bit. Calendar and communication. Let's dive into calendar just a little bit and kind of break that apart.
Well, you are the queen of calendar management.
I love
You've done a fantastic job managing a calendar. We've discovered the unique flair of managing calendars. I think one of the struggles I had managing calendars in construction was trying to figure out how to organize all of the things related to projects.
Right.
One thing I discovered in all of that was if you have a lot of volume as a business, in other words, if you're a service company or you do installs or something like that, you probably just need a calendar for each team that does installs, technicians or something along those lines, right? So team A is working here doing these things.
So shared calendars.
Shared calendar, yes. So so I jumped a little bit ahead there. So we need a shared calendar, right?
Right.
So a Google Drive, Google Calendar,
Outlook
calendar, something like that, right?
Most of them you can share.
Yes, right. So share it between your team. They all have access to the same calendar. So team A has a calendar, team B has a calendar. If you're doing something like I was, remodel, building new homes, things like that, we ended up building a project-specific calendar. So each job had its own calendar.
Right.
What I liked about that was there was a lot of very specific job-related things. You know, the pre-construction element of here, we're working on getting a survey, we're working on building plans, and you can kind of track where the job was and where it was going, and then you can see how it meshed with other things going on.
Right.
So the beautiful thing about these shared calendars is you can have overlays of like one calendar enabled, another one disabled, or all of them showing at the same time. And that all calendar view really gives you this insight and be like, oh, wow, we're overscheduled.
Right. Because
who's going to do all of that?
Gives you insight into
so that needs to get moved back. This needs to get moved ahead. It does, and there's more sophisticated ways of managing this, like Microsoft Project and Gantt charts. And I mean, when you start scaling to a significant point and you have prerequisites and all this stuff, and you need something more exhaustive.
Sophisticated, and we'll talk about some tooling and some shortcuts in that way in our next episode on project management too.
Yes.
But I think at a minimum, having a calendar, having checklists, having calendar, and having communication is what's required. It's not exhaustive in that sense. And, I think from my perspective of calendars, and I live by my calendar. Like the commitments I make, they end up on my calendar or they're not happening, And so it's like,
so how do you make sure that everything gets on your calendar?
Yeah. I think if I'm having a phone call with a customer, if I'm having a phone call with my spouse, my husband, if I'm having, you know what I mean? No matter what the commitment is, if I'm on the phone and we're working through dates or I'm in person, I have my calendar pulled up so that I'm vetting what does my week look like? Okay, I can't. And then it really sets boundaries too. Yeah. It allows you to communicate clearly about, well, I can't meet this week. This week's not good. Let's look at next Tuesday. You know what I mean? It allows you to really schedule out and just have clarity into your priorities. If something else needs to get moved around, you're moving that live on your calendar, which there's really no excuse like for anyone in today's day to not live by their calendar. You have a calendar in your pocket, and even if you're a paper calendar person, highly recommend changing that thought process. Because my marriage is a happier marriage because my husband and I share a calendar. Because it's like he's committing to things for our family when I'm not with him while he's at work, oh, this thing popped up for his work. We have an event that night or whatever that may be. Yep. And it's just a touch point to be like, hey, by the way, this is happening, so that even your communication with your spouse is better, if you're living by your calendar. So anyway, I'm hardcore advocate for live by your calendar, keep your commitments. And I promise if you actually keep your commitments in terms of like your calendar's always scheduled out, exactly where you're supposed to be, all of those things, I promise you'll be a hero and your business will flourish because your follow through will be unlike anyone else. Yeah. It won't even be comparable to other people in the space. And I feel like that is almost the biggest complaint, even in construction, in the construction space, is just sometimes, I'm not saying anybody listening to this podcast, because I think everybody listening to this podcast wants to be better, right? They want to improve. There's a level of like, hey, I know I don't have it all put together and I'm trying to like soak in as much as I can. But you will set yourself apart from any other business if you can own that follow through.
Good stuff. One of the things that you guys, if you don't currently live by your calendar, you can have a little adjustment to do. And I think you have years and years and years of really mastering the calendar, tweaking it, improving it over time. And I think you have to be prepared for a little bit of pain right at the beginning. Sure. So when you switch from paper calendar to a electronic calendar, you might be tempted to say, this doesn't work. It's a pain. I got to get my phone. I got to do all these things. It's like, stick with it. Any change requires a little bit of perseverance at the beginning. So don't throw in the towel too quick. The other thing to remember is you're going to have to learn yourself in this process as well. How do you most effectively, because it's how we can tell ourselves excuses that we believe. Yeah. Life is this way, but it's really not. Just because we're saying, how many times have you heard somebody say, life is this way, and you're like, no, it's not that way at all. But they're essentially for them it is because of
something that happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's either an excuse or reason or something in their life that makes it that way. But doesn't have to be it that way. So I think with calendars, we have to make sure that we're prepared for that little bit of adjustment. I know I went through that scale process for me of like going from my calendar to more calendars to project calendars. And there was a little bit of like, how do we do this? And one of a few things that you guys need to remember in this that I think could be helpful. You need white space in the sense of I need space between meetings. You're not Superman.
So good.
Don't overcommit.
Yeah.
So instead of being like, I'm going to get all my meetings done in one day, and historically you can only get done 2. Yeah. Well, you get done 2. Yeah. And if you need to have 12, you're not getting them done in one day. Right. So don't be 2 places at the same time. Make sure there's enough space and padding to get between places. And I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story of something happened to me. So in a couple of situations. In the first situation, I'm telling a customer, we're going to have that done tomorrow. And we didn't get it done tomorrow. So the end of that day comes along and we're short of that. That customer saying, well, man, you didn't get done what you... Yeah. Essentially, they're disappointed, right? Yeah. Because what you said, what you communicated didn't happen.
The expectation you set was not met. Yep.
So there's that scenario. And you feel this pressure through that day too. Man, we're behind. We're trying to get this done. How are we going to get all this stuff done? We need to get done. You created that. I created that pressure for myself. Wow. Nobody's put that on me. We're saying, under ideal conditions, this will happen in 2 days. It's like, why would we ever do that to ourselves? Right. So you guys got to stop ever telling somebody the most optimistic schedule. Yeah. Always go for that worst case scenario. And when you build calendars, you want to build that padding into that calendar as well. Yeah. So that's good.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I think some of that like setting expectation side of things kind of goes back to an episode that we recorded. I don't even know how many episodes ago. Maybe Sam can link it in the show notes below as well. But it was on negative expectations and just like the importance of that. Of like, man, if you can own the checklist side, the calendars, setting negative expectation. I just added another one in there, but that we weren't planning on talking about. But I think it goes back to what you're talking about. Of like, padding makes you a hero to your customers, makes you a hero to your subcontractors because it gives them buffer. So you're not like riding them as hard. Maybe if you're
I'll tell you a crazy thing we had. I had a project on a house we were building, and we were so eager, and it was a newer team, and without a checklist, without a calendar,
recipe.
without the communication, all the 3 C's were not there. Oh, no. Complete disaster, learning experience.
We should have started with this story.
Maybe, but what we ended up having is everybody looking like, man, these prima donnas, they don't know what they're doing. And we had a skilled team of people, but they weren't talking to each other. We weren't using checklists. And so this is why this is so important. Yeah. We're communicating the wrong things at the wrong timeline. We didn't have padding in place. So the drywall guy's showing up before the installation is done. He's saying, what are you guys thinking? It's not ready for me yet. Yeah. He's frustrated. Yeah. You're losing momentum. The customer's wondering what's going on. So anyway, that can't happen. You get so much sideways energy, and you start looking like a complete moron.
Yeah. Well, and having calendars and checklists mastered, but no communication is ultimately worthless.
Yes. So the final C here is yes. You're so right.
Is communication. What's the importance of communication? How do we like tie it all together, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's so many people we're communicating with, and so many times we make assumptions that they know things that they might not otherwise really understand are happening. So customers, I mean, number one, we got to communicate with our customer. Yeah. What's happening? When's it happening? And this is back, though, to making sure you have that padding in there. You know, when the customer's all eager, when's that happening? Yeah. This is not where you use precision. This is where you give yourself lots of space. Yeah. This is not your internal calendar. Right. This is your external calendar. Totally. These are the numbers you will always beat. These are how you communicate to your customer. When's drywall happening? Well, in about a month. When you know you're starting that in a week. You'd never want to communicate to your customers your exact timeline for things. Yeah. And even this can come down to even service work, like giving them people windows. Yeah. I know several companies really effective at that, where they're saying our technician is going to be there between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Yeah, that's so good. Why would you say 10 a.m.? Yeah, somebody's looking out the window and saying, "Where are you?" At 10:30, you're late. Yeah, so by 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. Now, some people are still going to assume that, well, why are you 10:30? But not saying they understand, and they're making their whole schedule around yours with a window of time. Yeah. Okay, well, it could be 2 p.m. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to track what you're telling your customers too. That's a good point. Because if you have 2 projects going on at once, or 10 or 50 or however many projects you have going on at once, there's a lot of irons in the fire. And so if you're not tracking, it kind of, communication goes back to tracking a lot of that too. And I'm obviously a lot of the things I'm a firm advocate of, our listeners might not be, like calendars and communicate, CRMs and tracking a lot of stuff. Well, I think it's important, even though they don't become they're not saws and nails. Yeah. They don't feel like you're getting anything done. Yeah. But they're just as important. Right. And so I think tracking what you're communicating to people, when you're communicating to them, that's just as important, so that way, if they send you a text and you're like, oh, I wonder what they want to talk about, you can like really quickly jump back into like, what was the last thing that we talked about, And if a text thread to your salesperson on your team is all you have to go off of, and you don't have a place where that lives, then you're kind of up a creek in terms of like, you're going in blind, I guess is what I have to say. And so I think, all that said, a simple CRM, which even ConGenius could solve just the simple CRM side of things. If you don't need a product that's full takeoff, estimating, proposals, e-sign, then we have a simple CRM. Well, we have all that too. File management. I know. Yeah, I'm just saying that even if you're not looking, even if you've heard of us, or looked into us from an estimating standpoint, we have a lot of customers that are just getting value even from the CRM side, and file management side, uploading project files, things like that, adding in checklists to the notes on a project, things like that. And so anyways, all that to say, we have a lot of customers who are finding value in the communication side of ConGenius as well, because maybe then you don't need like full email, automations and things like that. You're likely you don't. Yeah. Right. And so anyways, that's just, obviously that's a little bit of a plug, but it is something to just kind of maybe pique your interest and think about, like, hey, is this something where if you have somebody else on your team, you need to have a place where they can find contact information, project location, a warboard of where's all my projects at, it might need to be a digital form of that, not a whiteboard in the office or, things like that. So anyways, I think just to get better at communication across your team, to customers, I guess is what I mean, like customer facing communication, your team has to be in the know of like where things are at. One consistent place for things. Yeah, just exactly. Like where you put your tools. Exactly. Where is the nailer? Well, it always goes in the same spot. So if you have one consistent place for communication, one consistent place where the calendar's managed this way. And I think this just ties so perfectly back in with the checklist. This is how we communicate, where we communicate, and how we communicate, and when we communicate. Yeah, that was something we talked about in prep too, of like, hey, if communication's not your strong suit, build it in the checklist. Yes. Add it as a checkpoint. And even if it is, even if you love communication, it probably still needs to be your checklist because you have, to your point, the more irons you have in the fire, the more things you have going on, the more likely something that's, or even second guess yourself. Did I communicate that? Yes. And if nothing else, you have a point in time where you say, on this date, this time, this happened. So good. And you have that, you can sleep good at night. Right. Yeah. So, okay. When should we communicate? I mean, what are a few examples of like times to communicate like proactively, I guess, with a customer? Yeah. Well, giving your customers much notice when something's deviating from the plan is really important.
Yeah,
and I think we tend to shy away from things we don't like. This is human nature. We do not like pain. We do not like disappointing people. At least I don't. I mean, I feel like that's human tendency, right?
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody like disappointing their customer? No. I mean, we'd rather tell them good news. You know, like, hey, we're ahead of schedule, we're under budget, and we're going to, we're just crushing it. You know what I mean? Like, everyone wants to tell their customer that. But addressing the negatives head on as early as possible. And so if your schedule is lagging behind, you're like, there's no way Friday we're going to be at that job. Well, call them Monday and say, you know what, we're running behind. I want to make sure that, we give you as much notice as possible. And then give yourself that padding, adjust and radically adjust. Because have one phone call, not two. Don't tell them we'll be there Monday. Tell them they're going to be at 2 weeks out. Deal with the negative stuff up front. Hit it head on. Your customers are going to be happier. Deal with disappointment once, not continually. Because now it's, I've seen several times when someone said, well, we'll be there tomorrow, we'll be there tomorrow, we'll be there tomorrow, and they never, and then 2 weeks later they show up. Deal with it one go. So hit negativity one time, deal with it, hit it head on, get it done with.
That's so good.
Don't shy away from it.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. I love it. So in close, we don't want to go on too long about processes. Final thoughts. Hit us with the final thoughts.
Well, I think this really goes back to where we started, guys. I mean, this is the picture where your business is efficient. It's streamlined. You're winning. Customers love you. And that's enabled by checklists. It's enabled by communication. It's enabled by the processes that you might lack today that take a little bit of work. The communication piece, the calendar, the checklist, these are things that just make you look like you know what you're doing. And not only that, people start, this is how you get referrals. This is how you get 5-star reviews. These are the things that separate the men from the boys. So keep it up. I know it's not easy. Get into it.
This is the way, though. It's funny. We were joking earlier. We're like, this is the way, the truth, and the life. But no, it is the way of managing.
I mean, it's how you make money, and it's how you avoid a lot of headaches, and don't keep yourself awake at night.
So good. Cool. I love it. Well, guys, one thing that you could really help us out with is if you found any of this helpful, follow the show. Rate it, comment, and share it with anybody that you think it'd be relevant with so we can get more feedback and help more people.
Cool. Awesome.
Check you back in 2 weeks.